Okay, so I'm back with another video, and this video was actually inspired by another YouTube video that popped up in my algorithm, and it specifically addressed alpha envy. So I did not know anything about like the alpha female, sigma female rhetoric until I watched this video. And in the video that I'm referencing, I'm going to be sure to include it in the description box below. But it talked about how alpha females oftentimes harbor feelings of envy towards sigma females. And the reason being is that alpha females, due to them being super like highly charged, very dominant, very head first, almost like strong arming their way into a lot of opportunities, relationships, resources. When they come across a quote unquote sigma female, first and foremost, their world is turned upside down because it's hard for them to fathom or wrap their head around being successful outside of dominance and force. But also too, the sigma female also pokes at an open wound for them and almost ignites insecurity, because sigmas are just as successful, just as strategic, and just as productive without the dominance and force. And this video was super informative and super entertaining, and I had to pretty much make an analysis of my own based off of what I learned in this clip, and also, of course, including some of my other points to provide a personal analysis. So without further ado, let's hop right in. So in my brief research, alpha females were noted to be confident, to be bold, to be assertive, risk takers, even people who were romantically dominant in a sense. They were people who weren't afraid to take the lead in romantic capacities. And also, too, when we think about this professionally, an alpha female may be somebody who dominates their respective profession lane. You may find this person being, the leader in some capacity, whether it be they're in a supervisor position, a position of some kind of counsel, of guidance, a boss, a director, etc. So these are women who typically take charge, but not even just in a professional capacity, maybe even in the friendship. This might be the person in the friend group who creates the itinerary and makes sure that everyone sticks to it. They plan all the trips. They're super rigid in a sense. I would say that the alpha female falls in line with like the quote unquote type A personality. Now, in doing my research on quote unquote sigma females, some of the characteristics associated with this archetype was kind of being aloof in a sense, but mysterious more so. Somebody who also was less romantic, just as productive, but in a laissez-faire kind of way, not necessarily leading with dominance or force. Instead, they kind of go with the flow and they assert themselves in a backhanded manner. In sum, what I gathered from the quote-unquote sigma profile is that these are the type of women, allegedly, who seem to attract rather than chase. And even though there may be strategy and intentionality behind the decisions and the actions that they take, because they have such a laid-back approach, almost like they don't put a lot of intention behind it, even if that's the exact opposite. And this profile makes me think of a type B personality. But when we put these two profiles up against one another, or we hold them both up at the same time, you'll realize that there's always a clash of the titans. But the interesting thing is, the clash of the titans is not a mutual effort. Instead, the clashing mainly comes from the alpha female. And it made me think back on a lot of the analyses that I've been doing, especially like my TV analyses on my channel, and how there's often protagonist and an antagonist to every single storyline. And even though I dissect it in the context of envy exclusively, it's important to note this dynamic. And I wanted to dive a little bit deeper as to why alpha females do feel compelled to come up against sigma females, even though sigma females often display that they're not interested in competing or one-upping the quote-unquote alpha female. Now, in the video that I referenced earlier that ended up inspiring this analysis, it talked about how oftentimes that clash of the titans is rooted in the fact that alpha females almost feel, I don't believe they worded it this way in their video, but they almost feel as if sigma females don't put in the same amount of effort. And what the clash of the titans is rooted in is differentiating values. However, I want to take it a step further by assessing this, of course, because this is the nature of my channel, by assessing this dynamic exclusively through the lens of envy. And when I think about this relational dynamic, I cannot help but think about the envious archetype listed in the book titled The Person Who Believes They're Better Than You. And I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from that section. The section reads, "This is the individual who has convinced themselves they are superior to you in their minds, whether it be they were more popular than you, made more money than you, were deemed more attractive, had more influence or affluence, etc. However, they've perceived that they lost their status to you in some way. This person's ego creates an air of delusion where they believe that whatever superiority they previously had or currently have over you makes them deserving of whatever you are achieving currently." So really this friction and this one-sided conflict that alphas often ignite when it comes to quote-unquote sigma females, it's rooted in their mental rigidity, where they only believe that success comes by force and it doesn't come by mental agility. And I think that that's where sigmas kind of reign supreme in their own right. They're just as productive, it's just their productivity is by alternative means. And this is something that oftentimes alphas cannot fathom because they are so headstrong. And so, I mean, not to put it in this way, but almost in a sense self-centered, because their self-centeredness typically serves them as a way of advocating for themselves and making sure that their needs are met in professional spaces and interpersonal spaces. But sometimes it can cause them to have blind spots where they can't perceive that there are other ways to achieve goals and aspirations. And in an attempt to justify their rigidity, what they will do is they will project their skewed perception of success and productivity onto quote-unquote sigma females. So sometimes you may deal with alpha females who may say certain things that kind of invalidate sigma females' efforts, or they may constantly, throw at them that they're not doing enough or they need to try harder. But it's really them trying to alleviate the discomfort of them doing the most and seeing certain results, but being around somebody who isn't doing all of the extras, but still achieving the same thing. And I recently posted another analysis on my page that kind of dissects this alpha sigma dynamic to the T, except for it was through like a sitcom or, characters within a sitcom, which was Tony and Joan on the show Girlfriends. And one thing that I want to highlight is within that dynamic, you will realize that Joan oftentimes will use her values and, her moral reasoning, in a sense, to justify her superiority complex or her attempts to establish a superiority complex over Tony. And alpha females will often do little things like this to alleviate their feelings of jealousy and envy towards the quote-unquote sigma female. This concept also makes me think about a video I posted at this point, I believe a few months ago. And I think the video is titled something along the lines of "They're mad you did more with less." And what that video was getting at is how sometimes you may be dealing with people who envy you because you seemingly came from humble beginnings, or you didn't have as much as them. Maybe you didn't work with, as much experience, as much, social networks or, resources, etc., but you were still able to be productive in your own right. And you'd be surprised that there are certain people who occupy a particular status or they occupy a particular position and they still envy you, but they envy you because they know that the odds were stacked against you and you still were able to find success, or rather establish success, by your own means. And this notion is prevalent in the section of the book titled Redefine Your Battle, which is all about redefining what success and vindication looks like for you in the concept of envy, and also the importance of lasting power in the face of envious attacks. And where sigma females oftentimes come out on top is they understand that fast movers have a difficult time being quick thinkers. In other words, they understand the art of slow and steady wins the race. They prioritize thinking things out and planning things out with strategy before taking action. Alpha females, on the other hand, they lead with their boldness and their confidence. And that leadership is beneficial for the most part as far as getting the ball rolling and making sure that people aren't dragging their feet when it comes to making a decision. So the plus side of this is things typically get done. The downside of it is this. it can almost be impulsive. They tend to lead with impulse, and they lack that much needed strategy, planning, and intentionality before taking a course of action. This oftentimes leads to potential pitfalls. So even though they may make momentum at a point in time, they oftentimes have to go back and do a lot of damage control because their impulse led to a lot of chaotic decisions and a lot of chaotic downfalls. So sometimes alpha females have feelings of jealousy and envy towards sigma females because they face that harsh reality that sometimes they ended up in positions where they were moving really fast, but they weren't necessarily getting anywhere. And the friction only becomes prevalent when alpha females don't admit that they can learn from sigma females, but in particular, sigma females' ability to exercise insight, perception, and calculation before making any sudden moves. Now, of course, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's room for boldness, there's room for assertiveness, there's room for executive decision making, but everything comes with balance. And that's the differentiating factor. Sigma females understand the art of balance, while alpha females often struggle with balance. So in sum, alpha females' envy towards sigma females is rooted in their inability to comprehend. Success does not always come by force and by assertion. Sometimes success in leadership comes by acceptance and authenticity. All right, babes, so that is all that I have for my brief analysis on the quote-unquote alpha female versus the sigma female. Please feel free to share your opinions, your personal analyses in the comment section below. I would love to hear you all's input, and I look forward to speaking to you guys in the next one. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.